The one that fell apart. She's the one I think that got it together because of what's going on. Well, I know Daryl's down the road. Hope to see you there. We'll see. Be there too. You don't have to stay there long. And if he doesn't like to have water, I'm having water. Right. Or I could be rowdy with water. We can move our chairs this way because who cares, right? Or is somebody doing something fancy with this? Well, you didn't have to. Our heads would not be in the way. Yeah. So if you want, we can all slide this way or not. How is your just move our chairs this way. Oh my God. This party's getting rowdy. But listen, people can still get by us if we want. I'll start.
I saw your sister. She did ice cream down at the playground.
And I think people can still get through. We're just thinking the speaker is going to be in our way. Good. This is better. Are you? Or now you have a poll.
No, I'm not. It's not.
You're happy? They're happy.
This is fine. I wish the lady that you were sitting next to, I know I should know her. They would have
I don't think I'm.
I haven't seen that.
And people change your shit. Karen sees it like
I'm at 100th Street Road in Southwood.
Hi, Kevin. Hello, Edna. Do you want to?
What do you call Jane?
it's just whatever.
Crazy.
Great. Today you take this.
Hi.
Hello, Dolly.
Christian, hi. It is. It's great. Hi. They changed, so they leave me in Delevan in 4th grade.
He's on the board.
I do.
We're glad to have whomever we can get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Just knew them for many years, so I apologize.
I like them. The flight ones are the ones I remember. That's how it should be. Yeah.
Oh, I know. There's like this kids in there.
You don't change. You look the same, but they're the ones that change. And they think we should remember, and they have to tell me about you. And then something like that. No. Well, geez. Causing trouble as usual. How are you? Yeah. Are you going to speak tonight? You're going to give a speech tonight? Yeah, you worked there, didn't you? Yeah, how many years? Really? Right out of college? Came to Delevan? Yeah, I read about you in the book. So are you up in the Adirondacks for this summer? You haven't seen anything? No, you haven't. Florida?
Well, we're supposed to be the one that ended up in the No, no.
Yeah, we drove by the house today.
Now, did you get any of the storage? You know, my cousins were inspecting and I see wells now.
Yeah, I worked for Kendor 6 years out.
Well, and when we were
Made all my contacts.
and so
Yeah, he left
And then I joined Kendor in 85.
talked about here, but yeah, we
You know, was living at your house is
Potsdam this past weekend.
3 weeks with them, a week in Washington, and 2 weeks later I found it at my house. All the kids in
Your mom comes over. She wanted to. She just couldn't. She's very beautiful. So she said she should have
checking everybody
I absolutely will.
if ever you should see her, this Karen decided to stay where she was. She says it's like church. She likes sitting in the back.
right there. They're like, they're both on the
She's my friend from way back. I was actually in a
Good evening, everyone.
I'll be quiet.
Attention, please. Fortunately for all of you, I'm not your guest. But my name is Bradley Parker, and on behalf of the Cattaraugus County Board of Trustees, my fellow trustees, I want to welcome you here tonight and thank you for coming. If you're a regular here at the Stone House, you know that our eloquent museum curator, Brian McClellan, usually kicks these off, but you all drew the very short straw, and here I am. But I won't keep you long. But speaking to Brian, at the end of last year, he discovered or became aware of a pile of excess cut sandstone blocks from the museum, which are over on the other side of the nursing home. And chances are they were accessed from the late 1960s when the elevator shaft was added to the stone house here on the south end. So Brian suggested that we take those stones and fashion them into benches here at the museum grounds. So as you look over here, you will see the realization of his epiphany. So as a nod to Stonehenge, coupled with Albany's progressive legislation, the benches give a whole new meaning to get stoned at the museum. So we're thrilled with Brian's suggestion, and we appreciate the labor from the county DPW, as well as the maintenance crew over here at the Pines for assembling the benches. And to take it one step farther, Brian suggested that for our first bench dedication, we dedicate a bench in honor of our longtime board member, now board member emeritus, Ann Easton. Yeah, exactly. That's what evokes when you mention Ann Easton, if you know it. Ann suggested about 20 years ago, actually, Ann suggested that the museum relocate from Little Valley over here to the grounds at the Pines. And thanks to her foresight, we've been enjoying greater patronage and community involvement than we have for many years before we were at the other location. Following her career as a county nurse, Ann continued her community service as a volunteer next door at the Pines and as a devoted board member here at the museum. So this evening, in recognition and appreciation of her public service to Cattaraugus County, we are thrilled to dedicate our first bench in honor of Ann Easton, whose immeasurable grace is exceeded only by her humility. We recognize Ann's lifelong appreciation of history, her dedication to historic preservation, and her strong advocacy for the museum. Although Ann could not be here tonight, I understand this is being live streamed. And so wherever you are, Ann, out there in cyberspace, thank you for all you've done. And don't be mad at me, it was Brian's idea. So filling Ann's shoes is her lovely daughter, Edna Easton Scharf, who will come up and receive the plaque on her mom's behalf. So thank you, Edna. Of course. You're welcome. And don't get too comfortable with that because we get it back. What the government giveth, the government taketh.
Mom says thank you so much.
Of course.
She's sorry she couldn't be here tonight.
Oh, how wonderful. Very good.
So without any further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our speakers tonight, Jason and Sandra Dedrick. It's all yours.
All right, we're on YouTube, so try not to be too nervous. Well, thank you all for coming out. I'm Jason Dedrick. It's my sister Sandy, and we're here to talk about our dad, Art Dedrick, and we wrote a book about him, which came out last year. Some of you have it, I know, and to focus on his relationship to Cattaraugus County and Delevan, Machias, and the school district, and so on. So even though his career spanned, across the U.S. and his company, Kendor, Greg's company also later, was known around the world, it was always sort of centered here in Cattaraugus County. We wanted to really make that connection. It's good to see so many friends and family too. Thanks for all coming out. So to start at the beginning, Art Dedrick was born in Linden, New York, which is a little bit south of here. And his family lived there for a couple of years, and then they bought a farm up on McKinstry Road, between, so most of you know where that is. It's a couple miles from here. And his early years, we're here in Delevan. This is an aerial photo that was taken, I think, in the 50s. And these two houses are basically where our dad spent most of his life. So on the lower left hand is where he grew up, he and his siblings. Also Brad, wherever you are, grew up in that house. After our grandma passed away, Perky moved into the house, and so Brad and his family grew up there. And then across the road is where we all grew up. We'll talk about our parents bought that house in the early 40s, and then they lived there for basically the rest of their lives. So that's kind of the setting. I drove by today, it looks a lot different. Things changed, but This is our grandparents. So Edith Strickland Dedrick is our grandma, and George Washington Dedrick.
You've got to step back
Oh,
or something.
sorry.
Because we
Can't
can't
see
see
that.
the pictures.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to do the slides.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's Edith and George. Edith was a school teacher and a small, Carl?
Now you're not in the.
No, you're not in the live stream.
Uh-oh. This is not.
No, I think you're, Jason, I think you're okay. Where you are, I think you're okay. I'll double check with Brian.
Yeah, I need my text yeah, so Edith was a school teacher, a farmer, George was a farmer, you can see the outfit, and also, according to our Uncle Rusty, was not the best trombone player, but the loudest trombone player we ever heard. He said when the marching band was coming down the street, you heard George before you heard the rest of the band by quite a while. So that was kind of what got us into the musical direction. Edith and George had 6 kids. The oldest is also George, but we all knew him as Ward. And then our Uncle Larry, Aunt May, Art is in the middle with the bowl haircut kind of thing. And then Rusty is littler, and then Aunt Ruth is the baby. So she was born in 1920, so that's about when this picture was taken. They grew up in a house that had no electricity, no running water, no flush toilets because they didn't have running water, no central heat. So all of us locals can think about going to an outhouse in the middle of winter in Delevan, and how much that built their character to do that, I guess. But they did have, they studied by kerosene lantern around the table, and they also played music. Everyone in the family was a musician. They would have sort of a local band. Sometimes they played barn dances and things like that. Out of those, of course, my dad and Rusty both became professional musicians. They also valued education. All of the siblings went through high school, went to college. They all had good careers. They all, they've all passed away now, but they were sort of the salt of Cattaraugus County, I guess you could say, in the Delevan. The high school also had music. The band director was Frank Gullah, who later went to Penn State and was a professor and a band director there, or a chorus director, I think, for about 25 years. And you see all those kids with the instruments. In the circle is our dad over on the left. That was probably like every kid in grades 9 through 12 was in the band, because Delevan High School they really didn't have many kids, but they got them all out for music. Our dad also went on to compete in trombone competitions. So they used to have solo competitions for the different instruments. So he started out competing in Fredonia for Western New York, and he came in first place. And then he went to Syracuse for New York State competition. Also came. You guys okay? Yeah. Also came in first place, and so he qualified to go to Chicago for the national competition, but of course they had no money to send him to Chicago. But the people of Delevan all pitched in their change and whatever they had and raised enough money to send him, by train fare and hotel to Chicago, where he competed at the 1932 World's Fair in Chicago and came in second in the U.S. So again, the support of the community really made that possible. And that's a theme we'll come back to again and again. After that, he went to college at Fredonia. Back in those days, it was called Fredonia Normal School, which is what they call the teachers' colleges. Now it's SUNY Fredonia that we all know it as. But basically, that was where people went to become teachers, and they also had a music program. So he was in the music program. One of his first days at Fredonia, he said he saw this girl, and he said, "I'm going to marry her." Turned out she was a city girl named Jessie Reed and had indoor plumbing and all those things. She grew up in Buffalo. He fell in love, and they were there for 4 years, of course. They were both in the symphonic band. You really can't see it, but she's over on the left, and he's on the right. If you get the book, you can see it a little bit better. doing a sales pitch already. And so they played. Harry King was the conductor, and this was 1935. They graduated in 1937. They wanted to get married, but apparently her dad wasn't too keen on the idea of her marrying this farm boy from Delevan. So rather than try to get his permission, they eloped. And they spent the first 3 weeks of their marriage living in a tent on Lake Erie. So it doesn't sound that bad, but apparently it rained all the time. So finally they came in from the rain and told her father and graduated and went on with their lives. The first, basically once they got out of school, this is when he started his career as a musician. So his dream, like when he was at Fredonia, he was playing in little bands at all the bars that had sprung up after Prohibition, and you know, he wanted to be a band leader, and so he started that career. Our mom had a contract to teach for a year in Mexico, New York, which is up north of Syracuse. So she had to honor that contract. Well, he went off and started playing with bands. He played with some bands locally around Western New York and Buffalo and Niagara Falls, and also went out to the Midwest and toured as far as I think Nebraska and Iowa and in that area. Eventually came back, and sort of during this time, he went back and forth several times between leading his own band, which is what he really wanted to do, and being sort of backup bands for other musicians in those days. This was the 1930s, it was the swing era, so people like Benny Goodman and Count Basie and Duke Ellington and Glenn Miller and people like that were very popular. So he had this back and forth of being a sideman, which means you're playing for someone else, which he didn't like, but sometimes you got to do it to make a living, and leading his own band. He got his big break in late 1940, when he was hired to put a band together for Vaughn Monroe, who probably very few of you have heard of, but he was a big star in those days. Our dad spent about 2.5 years with this band, and they had 18 songs in the top 10 just in that period. So he was like a hit maker. And I've got a couple pictures from that. So this was the band, and during this time, they toured around the East Coast, up and down, but they also did some long stints in Boston and New York. And while they were in Boston, Sandy came along. There she is. She was born in Boston, and then they lived there for quite a while, and then they moved to New York City, and for about a year he was playing at the Hotel Commodore, and I think the Paramount Theater in New York. So they did some long spells there. And they were recording all the time, and he started being the main arranger for Vaughn Monroe, so taking the songs and writing out the instrumentations. And that was really where he developed that skill, which, you know, 500 or 600 compositions at Kendor and other places later was really a lot of his career. So at that point, it's 1940s. By the end of 43 or during 43, the Monroe band broke up, which most of the bands did in World War II. They bought the house that we showed you up on McKin Street, and Dad started writing music for the radio stations, which used to have live music. And so he wrote for WBEN and WGR, which were two of the major stations in Buffalo in those days. And he worked. Helped out on our Uncle Ward's farm, and they were they had Sandy, and she was a baby. In 43, our brother Bruce was born. And so everything was kind of going along until 1944, when there was a big polio epidemic that swept the Northeast. Art and our brother Bruce both got polio. So there was a time when they were in 2 different hospitals, and our mom was traveling back and forth from one to the other, not knowing if they were going to live or be on an iron lung or what was going to happen to them. Luckily, they had family nearby, so our grandma was still across the road, and Uncle Ward and other people were nearby, and friends, and they sort of pitched in, taking care of Sandy and helping out financially and just keeping things going. Bruce recovered from the polio, but our dad was incapacitated for about 6 months. In fact, he used to keep these really meticulous records of all his income and expenses. I mean, like 50 cents for a pair of socks, or $2 for shoes for Sandy, whatever. And in 1944, from July 15th to November 1, he just has this entry that says polio. So that whole time, you know, he was making nothing. But by the time he was able to rehab enough, even before he got up and was able to be in a wheelchair, which a lot of, you know, people that knew him saw him in a wheelchair. Before that, he was in a hospital bed. And there's a carpenter named Bob Howell, some of you might remember.
Built our house.
There you go. He came and rigged up some kind of a desk kind of contraption over the bed where he could put up music sheets and tack them on there and start writing music scores. And so his first check, well, he had a union check, but he got one from BBC, which was the Buffalo Broadcasting, one of the radio stations. And that was on his back. And then as he got more rehabilitated and get up and get in the wheelchair, he was able to write. He could get to the piano and could write more, and basically was able to start this new career. Sandy's going to talk about that, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about how he adapted to disability. I mean, there were no ramps, there were no anything for buildings then. Everything was get around however you could. So his sort of navigation or his mobility came from, first of all, you know, the wheelchair, which is a picture of Mom and Dad and Bruce there. So that was his sort of main ability to get around every place in the house and everything. But he also had this little setup with crutches and leg braces. And so if there's a place he couldn't get with a wheelchair, like across this lawn, then he may have gotten across, or onto airplanes when he started flying around. He would sort of get the crutches under his arms, and the braces were here and braced his legs, and would kind of swing his legs forward and land, and then swing his leg forward and land. Apparently he used to do that over here in the Machias High School, I think, or maybe it was Delevan. One time he slipped and got hurt, but that was another way of kind of getting around. And the most fun was his Oldsmobile. So they came out with the hand controls, and he always swore he was a better driver with the hand controls than anybody else with their hands and their feet. There's a couple of people we interviewed in the book that played in his band that said that the drives to the gigs in the band were pretty hair-raising experiences. You know, he didn't mind going fast. He put those Oldsmobile engines to their sort of full capacity. Especially in the winter, it was probably pretty fun to do that. So anyway, this is how he got around. He started his new career, and I'm going to have Sandy come in and talk about sort of the next phase of his post-polio career in life. So.
So anyway, Deb was writing arrangements for the radio stations in Buffalo and still for Vaughn Monroe and for Buddy Rich, the drummer, and doing very well. I think in 1946 he brought in $155 twice a month, but by 1947 it was $95. The radio stations were letting go their live musicians because TV had come in and so on, and then the following year, zero. So he had to find a way of making a living, and so he took a teaching job, and it was in Delevan, Machias Central School, which I don't know how many of you here went to that school. Raise your hand if you did, I'm curious. Yeah.
Or Pioneer.
Or Pioneer. Pioneer.
Right.
So he was a natural teacher, actually. He was really good. And he started teaching instruments in the 4th grade, and he insisted that we practice. All of us kids took instruments, and a lot of my friends, the kids in the school, took instruments in 4th grade up until 7th grade. And if they were good enough and had practice, they could actually go right into the senior band sometimes if they were in 7th or 8th grade. And he was always providing opportunities like that for people. It was really just incredible what he did. And so he had a concert band, he had a marching band, he had a dance band, and he also had an inter-community band. I don't know if any of you were in that one, but that was for, I don't know how many summers he did that, in Franklinville, in the gazebo when it was there. And he would have anyone from age, say, 8 up to in their 90s in this particular band. So he was always like offering opportunities. The marching band was really interesting. he would drive his car alongside of the band and call out the directions. You know. And we'd be playing, and we'd have to mark time, or we'd have to stop, or whatever. But in performance, and not performance, I shouldn't say that, it was for like Memorial Day, we would march in the parade, and in that case, there was a pickup truck that was ahead of the band. How many remember that? I do. And he would be facing the band, facing backwards, and we'd be marching behind this pickup truck. And he'd be conducting us, you know, and calling out the commands, stop, go, and so forth. And we really loved being in these bands. They were very good. He would spend half of the 4-day-hour rehearsal time just tuning us up. And I know I taught music and I taught the vocal, but I had concerts with little groups in elementary school. And it didn't seem like anybody tuned them up first. And if they had only tuned them up first, it could have sounded really good. Often it didn't, you know. So he had very, very good bands. But he began to notice that there wasn't music available for high school kids that they could play. There were stock arrangements, you know, from the big bands like Count Basie and Duke Ellington and so forth. But they were too hard for kids. So he would simplify them a bit. He knew his instruments and the limitations of them and so forth. So he would start to do that. And he got together with 2 other music teachers, Bob Hudson in East Aurora, and Chappie, who was his roommate in college, Lester Chappell, and then Kendor, and Dad in Delevan. And they started this company called Kendor, which is an amalgamation of all 3 towns in a way. And they had the first 10 arrangements were called the Prom Series, and they were either arrangements of known tunes or original tunes. And I think that the first thing they did was to send brochures out to the music teachers in New York State. And it was so successful that it grew from there, and he began, you know, sending out information and so on to all over the United States. And this company grew and grew. Started out in a basement in East Aurora and ended up in the Oddfellows Temple, as you know, in Delevan. For many, many, many years it was there. And I don't know if you've ever visited it, but there was a whole printing press in the back, a dark room, you know, plates hanging on clotheslines, tables in the front where Bruce and I collated the music, and then Stephanie and Jason. I don't know, did you ever do that? But Steph and Ellen did, and yeah, it was a real family affair, and Chappie's kids did as well. And offices up, and tons of space for storing music. So Kendor took off, and it was doing very, very well. At a certain point, we all grew up. Is there anything else I missed about Kendor?
Ray. Bob left and Ray.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Bob Hudson wanted to go back to teaching. Thank you. And Ray Cornwall came on board, and so then it was Ray and Dad and Chappie who were the partners. And Ray did all the printing. He was a printer to begin with, so he was very important in this organization. So we all grow up. Kendor's doing great. Dad's not teaching anymore, and we moved down. My husband and I moved down to New York City. Chris came down and lived with us for a year and went to the Manhattan School of Music and learned all about orchestration and writing music and so forth. And Bruce was already in New York City, so Bruce would come over with his guitar and he'd say, just let's sing, you know, just for the fun of it. So we started singing Peter, Paul, and Mary's songs, you know, Blowing in the Wind and all of them, just for the fun of it. And my dad came along. He used to visit down there. He had a smaller company down there. And he said, why don't you write original material? So that's when Chris wrote Kites Are Fun. And he wrote Kites Are Fun and another one called The Proper Ornaments. So my dad funded a demo of those 2 songs.
Jumping Art Dedrick bands, okay.
Ah,
We'll
there
come
we
back
are.
to it.
Okay. He funded those, and my husband at that time took them around to companies and got some offers for contracts, and some of them were big companies like RCA Victor. But my dad, again, was very involved, and he said, you know, you won't be able to use your own material if you go with a big company. They're going to give you a stage writer, and, you know, you just have to do what they say to do. So he convinced us that we should go with Enoch Light. And Enoch Light gave us what they call artistic freedom, which meant we could write, you know, like our first album had 9 originals on it, which was unheard of actually, and about, I think, 3 covers and so on for all the 7 albums that we did. My dad was really very instrumental in our growth as the free design. He was there in the studio. He was quiet. He's a great musician, so he had good advice to give while we were recording. Then he bought us equipment so that we could go around and, you know, do jobs. I think we did a fun affair in Syracuse with Roy Orbison. That was one of the first things I think that we did. Then he had contacts, like he had known Doc Severinsen. Doc Severinsen happened to be Johnny Carson's band leader at the time. So the very first TV show we did was The Tonight Show. If you can believe that. And it was all due to him, right? So, what have I missed, Jason? I'm not the speaker, but Jason, what's happening next year?
Well, we have the free design.
Yeah.
Want to go back to the his band?
That comes up after, doesn't it? He did. He always had a band. You got some pictures of that? Yeah. And he worked locally around here at dances, weddings. I don't know if he did weddings and that kind of thing, but a lot of musicians. That was another place, by the way, where he gave us opportunities and many other students opportunities. If we were good enough and practiced, he would let some of us come and play with his band. And you can't imagine, you know, if you're 15 years old and you have a saxophone and you're sitting next to these music teachers who are really, really good musicians. So not only Bruce and I and Chris got to do this, but I don't know if you know names, but Denny Marsh, Eddie, who else? Phil Murray? Yeah, Phil Murray. A lot of people actually did. And then Helen, who's here. Hi, Helen, raise your hand. Sandy, who's right behind Helen. Sandy, raise your hand. My dad wrote trio arrangements for the 3 of us. And he was working, he had the band working right down here in Lime Lake in the pavilion. And he let us come and we sat at a table right under the bandstand. And every once in a while we'd get up and he would let us sing a song in front of the band. Which is really, really incredible.
And he wouldn't let us go out of the building.
Oh, he wouldn't let us go out of the building.
Wow.
No, that's so true. But he did a lot of work around here with his band. In fact, my mother griped because he did 31 New Year's Eves in a row. And either the wives went along and sat at the table, you know, and enjoyed the music, or they stayed home on the music. So am I finished now?
So after the free design,
So this is kind of the career stuff that really happened. You know, Kendor went on, as we'll talk about, till 2022. So over the years it had been growing and growing. Originally they just published our dad's music, but then they started getting other very well-known composers and also sort of little-known composers who became well-known because they wrote for Kendor. Kids started playing their music and they really got to be well-known. Sammy Nestico and John LaBarbera and people like that, and they got music from Count Basie and Buddy Rich, who were Thad Jones, so very well-known jazz people. And they branched out to the concert band, choral,
String orchestra
string,
was big.
everything. And so, you know, the old Oddfellows, so they even, I don't know if I have a picture, but they even built a new section on to the side of it. Yeah, because, you know, because they had outgrown that building. So they were doing really well, and pretty much, I think, continued to do so for the next 50 years or whatever. It was a good company. You know, it employed a lot of people. It was good for the town. I think a lot of people around town didn't even know it existed, but they did really well. But for the next section, I want to just talk a little bit more about our family and about our friends. And there's a lot of our family and friends sitting here, so the people that knew Dad. So I'll just talk a little bit about sort of who he was more as a dad and as a friend, and so on. This is him. So we saw them in 1920. This is probably the 1950s, I'm guessing. But again, it's our and his mom, Edith, right behind him, and then from the left, it's May and Rusty, and Larry and Ward and Ruth. So all the siblings again. And then there was the next generation that came along, which was us. This is the 6 of us. If you don't know all of us, starting from the left, that's Ellen, Bruce, Chris, Sandy, and Steph, and me in the front with my little brush cut thing at Christmas. And then there was another generation of grandkids. The youngest of which is my daughter, Kayla, who's only 25. So she came long after everybody else. But there were 5 who were all kind of at the same era. And 4 of them are in this picture. So this is a family photo again. Dad has 3 of the kids on his lap. So that's Tanya, Jay, and Aaron on his lap.
And there's Jay right over there.
And there he is. And there's another generation. Jay and his 3 sons are here. And the 4th is Kenyala, who's being held by Aaron. By Ellen, not by Aaron. He's up there. And then there's Sandy and Paul and me and Uncle Ward and Kathy and Cora and Steph, all of us. But one thing about this picture with the wheelchair is the grandkids loved the wheelchair. First thing they did when they came home was say, I want to ride, I want to ride. And so they get on Dad's lap and he would take the wheelchair up and down through the house and give them rides. So when they were little like this, it was like a big kick for them to do that. You can tell we're in a low-tech era. That probably was it's nowadays too much. But anyway, so that's 4. And then there's my niece Dawn, Bruce's daughter, and my own daughter Kayla. Remember her name. 6 kids in the next generation. And then there's Jay's 3 kids. Tanya has 2. Aaron has 1, etc. So Kenyala has 2. So we keep kind of reproducing and so on. So besides family, so we were very tightly knit in the community, and with family, but also with friends. And some of you here were friends of our parents and of us when we were growing up. They had a lot of fun. Sometimes the most fun that I think a lot of our families had was getting together for barbecues and picnics and parties and cocktails, which they really enjoyed. And we had friends like, put a picture of some of them up.
Oh yeah, that's the greatest picture.
Yeah, so some of you will recognize your parents in that picture, or your uncles or other people in your families, if you look closely. We have the Smiths and the Christs and the Nichols, the Persons, the Dedricks, more Nichols, the Altmans. So all of them were living in Delevan one time. Some of them have moved on later, right? But you can kind of look at that. So Howard Christ apparently is taking the picture because he's not in it. His wife Ellen is on the left. Howard, some of you might know as a major league pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, and fought in D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. He was a hero in Delaware, and I don't think a lot of people know him as much as they should. And he ran the hardware and furniture. Yeah, then he had it. So the furniture and appliances store that Howard ran. Clarice is there. Also was a partner with Howard and ran the funeral home. A lot of people locally here from the ram businesses were really, really involved with Delevan. And so this was what they would do. They'd get together and have a good time. This is our living room. And they look like they're having a pretty good time together. And this is probably in the 50s, I would say, maybe early 60s. So we were like very, very much part of Cattaraugus County. That's kind of the last point I want to make, is how much, Dad traveled all around the country flying to promote Kendor and to teach it at music camps and clinics and things like that. Free design was all over the place, so, and Kendor sold to everybody. You guys have big customers in Germany, and Europe, Japan,
Australia,
all over. It was all coming right out of Delevan, that little building. That's a little building, but that connection locally really spread around the world. But we're still rooted here in Cattaraugus County, so that's really why you know, it's exciting to be here at this museum. And just to sort of finish the story, so our dad died in 1980, and after he passed away, Ray and Chappie, Les, ran the company, and then Les retired, and then Ray ran the company for, you know the number of years, quite.
Not, I came in when he was buying out Lester's shares in the business. So Jeff Jarvis and I came in at that point.
Yeah, so
That was 1985.
Yeah,
Dad
85.
retired like 96, 97.
Yeah, and so Ray and Craig and his stepbrother Jeff ran the company. And then eventually it became Craig's company. And we'll get to what happened at the end. But before we get to the end of Kendor, I do want to say that Pioneer Central, formerly Delevan Machias, formerly Delevan and Machias, honored Art Dedrick, the free design, and Kendor music back in 2013. They have a musical wall of fame over at Pioneer. So if you're ever there in the school, you can go and check it out. And they have the plaques for different people, musicians that were related to Pioneer. And so we went to a really nice ceremony they had at Pioneer. Craig and I represented Kendor and Art Dedrick, and Bruce and Sandy were there for the free design. So this is another one of the really big honors that we have locally to have been recognized like that. And finally, in 2022, Kendor was sold to Excelsior Music in Florida. From the Arcade Herald, there's an article about it. I think the important thing that Craig's talked about to me is that Excelsior continues to keep Kendor as a going concern. You know, other people might have wanted to buy all the copyrights or the music, but not keep Kendor alive. And so they're not in the building anymore in Delevan, but Kendor still exists. And you go on their website, and we get emails, and so they are still promoting Kendor. And so that's really something I think you guys are really happy about, and we're really
Very
happy
important.
about. That this tradition is 1954, and this is 2024, right? It's 70 years. It's not a bad run for a business. With that, I want to thank you all. If you have any questions, or if anybody just wants to share memories or anything, some of you who knew our dad, or just want to ask questions about what we talked about, I'll open the floor. But thank you. Maybe I have questions for you too. Oh, Nadine. And we were going, I'm sorry. The later years, so. No, I apologize. I apologize. Nadine Gardner, raise your hand, was hired in 1975, hired out of Fredonia. So, and Sandy went to Fredonia too, so we have a strong, and our brother Chris spent a year there. So we have a strong connection with Fredonia.
And my mom went to Fredonia.
And your mom went to, that's right, so.
And so did Pat's sons, I think. And, some of our cousins went there too.
Yeah, so Nadine was hired in 75, right? Worked for Dad for 5 years, and was assistant and sort of protege and learned from him. There's a great interview with her in the book, and there's a lot of great interviews in the book again. We're going to have some copies for sale that we'll sign, and all the money will go to the museum, so it's a donation we can make there too. I don't know if you can write it off taxes, but. Nadine worked with our dad for 5 years, and then stayed on with Kendor till 2022, right?
No,
Not quite.
retired a
Not
little
quite.
before that.
Retired a little bit before, but you pretty much spent your career.
Nearly 40 years.
Yeah, and she was like a rock at Kendor, and Craig will,
Absolutely.
and Jackie will.
Yeah.
And she was really the thread, because Craig came on later in 85. So
85.
sort of from our dad's time leading the company through Craig, Nadine stayed on, and I think she was really critical to the company.
Oh, very important. Help keep it seamless, going
Yeah,
from family to family. And
yeah, she was there all the way through.
Nadine took care of them during snowstorms.
Oh yeah, and that's in the book also. So the last year of our dad's life, he had a lot of health issues. He ended up dying from cancer, but he had a lot of issues and was up in Delevan, and there were times when like it was a blizzard and the electricity went out and the heat went out, and Nadine would come up and put wood on the fire and bring little sterno things to cook food for them and took care of them. And she was very close with our mom after our dad passed away. She was very, very, very good friends with our
Jesse
mom.
knew how to party.
Jesse teaching us a lot. Yeah, and she and Karen invited to mom to some of their events, and she partied and she had a good time. And
She had a great time.
yeah, so but yeah, when times were tough, and they were at times, you know, Nadine was there. And I really say, like, having polio in that period, it's like afterwards you think, well, he recovered and he did all these things, but you know, for 6 months he was then flat on his back and didn't know if he was ever going to get off his back. And there were people around then too that really helped him and helped our family through.
And he didn't need a lot of help. He was amazingly tough.
Yeah.
You know,
Always.
he really, if there was snow on the ground, he needed to get up the ramps of his wheelchair. He hauled himself up there. We helped him a lot, but he was a guy that was so determined that he just kept going. I gotta say, I didn't learn a lot of music from him. I learned a lot of music from the family. But what I did learn from Uncle Art was, I learned more about birds and nature, fruit trees, apple trees, blueberries. He was pretty much my mentor of those good things in life. You know, I got to spend a lot of time with him, and he'd drive me around in the Tornado, and we'd prune trees together and stuff. But every time we worked together, it was also something I learned, and a lot of it I didn't really remember till I got older. Started feeding the birds, getting interested, and all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, I know what that is. You know, I remember Uncle Art teaching me that, and this is their habitats. So he was very well rounded in nature and the world and life. You know, I mean, he wasn't the easiest guy to approach if you had a problem of your own, because, you know, but if you ask him for help, he'd always help you. One story my sister Kathy and I were just talking about, she played the trombone in school, or French horn in school, and my parents wouldn't let her play in the house because it was so god awful. You know, strange animals showing up in the middle of the night. So she was outside practicing as far away from the house as she could, and he was outside, and he could hear her. One day he waved her over and said, "Here, come on over here," and he taught her more about the French horn than her instructors had, and that got her going, you know. So it was kind of a neat.
She played all the way through.
It was kind of a neat story, yeah.
Yeah, and he also we have a little interview with your sister Sue, who also took some lessons on clarinet.
Yeah, she was a good clarinet player in school.
Yeah. So, and I really like the thing about nature. And as us kids, it was the same experience. He used to drive us. You'd see this big Oldsmobile going on the tractor paths out to the syndicate lot. So
Right.
3 people know what that is behind our house. But you know, in the middle of a cornfield was this big Oldsmobile, and nobody batted an eye because that was
Right.
nice, right?
Yeah. Trash day was a big deal, you know. We'd all go out to the dump and.
Yeah, there's a lot of good memories. But he really loved nature, and he did pass that on.
Absolutely.
To a lot of us. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just learned a lot from being around it, just like Sandy and Bruce and Chris, Steph, Ellen. I learned a lot about music and life, and you know, growing up, Chris was the coolest guy in the world. With his
Bob Lindsley.
Well, Bob Lindsley, yeah.
coolest
You
guy.
know. But Chris had that neighbor jacket, you know, and stuff like that. So
We're deteriorating into. We had a club in the singing group called the Woodpeckers, which our brother Chris on the first Free Design album wrote a song called My Brother Woody, which I was Woody and Brad was Whoa, and we had the Woodpeckers. Hopefully the stream is ended by now. Losing value. Well, if there's no more questions, we're going to let you go. But I'm going to say thank you all for coming. Really, really appreciate it. If you'd like a book, it's a great gift or it's a great read. Sandy and I will sign it. They're $15 or 2 for $25 if you'd like to buy them both. And it's going straight to the museum. We're not taking the cover. It'll just be a donation. So if you want to donate $15 to the museum and get a book, it's a great deal. And if you haven't been to the museum, I just walked through it now. It's just pretty cool.
It's great.
It's the first time I've been there, so I'd also recommend taking the opportunity to go through the museum. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you brought it? Yeah, it's in the car. Oh, yeah, sure.
I was looking for my sheet music.
It's always good to see you here and there. You show up on the 17th.